Order. Good afternoon and welcome to the Women and Equalities Select Committee. Today we will be looking at non-consensual intimate imagery abuse following a one-off session held by the previous committee in the last session. Our first panel, welcome, is David Wright, Chief Executive of the Southwest Grid for Learning and Director of the UK Safer Internet Centre. It's a mouthful. Sophie Mortimer, Manager of the Revenge Porn Helpline at the Southwest Grid for Learning. Welcome both of you and thank you very much for coming. I will open to questions. Kerith?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, David and Sophie, for your time today. I just wanted to start by asking Sophie, if I may, how many cases has the helpline dealt with in this and previous years, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't mind at all. Our total direct cases, as in that have come by email or by phone through to the helpline, is currently at just over 24,000. This year, it's at around about 3,500, just in this year alone. But we also we have a chatbot to manage capacity, and we've had about 35,000 sessions run through that chatbot.
And in your sort of evaluation, what impact do you think non-consensual intimate image abuse has on victims?
I think it's enormous. I think the impact on victims reaches into every corner of their lives, their personal relationships, work relationships, their ability to go about their lives, to go to the shop, to go to work, to engage with their family, their emotional and psychological well-being. And it is ongoing because as that content continues to circulate online, if it cannot be completely removed, then it's there every day and they are re-traumatised every day.
Thank you. My next question is for David. What is your assessment of the police response to non-consensual intimate image abuse?
If I might start as well with some thanks for the invitation to come and kind of share evidence and experience that we have. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity, and clearly, as it says, follows on from the session that we had in May. It's such an important subject. It's a subject that we, as you'll clearly discover, deal with all day, every day. And when I say we, I really mean Sophie and the team in terms of the royal we. I think in terms of police response, there's going to be no better person than Sophie to be able to provide you with from the experience that we have, because we do spend a lot of time coaching victims who have reported to the police.
I can give you a statistic that we do record people's response to how they've been dealt with by the police, where they have already gone to the police before we speak to them. And of the people that went to the police, 4 times as many reported a negative experience of reporting as a positive one. And that largely comes down to the officer or the call handler, that first person they've interacted with, around their understanding of the law as it is written in both its incarnations, how it might apply to their case, and also what can be done to support them. And the sense that many victims come away with is that there is no help, that their content can't be removed from the internet, that perpetrators are rarely prosecuted and even more rarely convicted, and that there will be no just outcome for them.
We move on. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question of that, Sophie and David. Are there any forces that are very good and have had a more positive response to victims, and others that would need a lot more improvement at all?
It would be really hard for us to say because the nature of the offence is that people don't often share demographic information that widely, so it might be unfair to name a particular either way.
David?
May I also just follow on from the previous question as well about case volume too, just to add as well in terms of the increase in caseload. So Sophie's articulating the volume that we're dealing with at the moment, but one of the things that we have experienced over the last 4 years is continued massive increase in cases arriving or people reaching out. So to give you some numbers, in 2019 we managed 1,600 cases. In 2020, largely fueled by COVID, I think is fair, that rose to 3,200 cases, to 4,400 cases in 21, to 8,900 cases in 22, and last year just under 19,000 cases. So over a 10-fold increase in 4 years is terrifying. And also, as we project forwards, we're anticipating, we have no idea how big the problem is. Sophie's analogy of we're just discovering more of this iceberg, but we don't know how big this iceberg is. But on that rate, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of cases a year.
Yes, I think I guess I'd kind of like to know a little bit more about, from your experience, what sort of sextortion is, and who does it affect primarily?
Sextortion is a very specific form of behaviour that comes through to the helpline, usually carried out by crime gangs based overseas, targeting predominantly men. Currently this year it's 91% male victims that have come to us. They meet somebody online, moves quite rapidly to sexual activity, which is recorded. Friends or contact lists have already been captured, and then there are threats to share unless paid money.
And from your view, why is it a growing problem?
Because it works. It's as simple as that. And there is limited, because the gangs are based overseas, it's very difficult for law enforcement to take any steps.
Thank you very much. I'll move to Catherine.
Hello, Sophie and David. Thanks for coming in. David, this is a question for you. So can you explain how the Stop NCII hashing tool works?
Indeed, I can.
Thank you.
So stopncii.org is a website, is a piece of technology that we built over a period. And what it does, it stands as technology for victims who are being threatened to have their intimate images posted online. So as the example has just been given about extortion is a great example. So if somebody's threatening to post my image online, we know that the impact on those individuals can be as impactful as actually having content shared as well. The loss of control, essentially, as an individual. So Stop NCII was created essentially for that. So it supports adults anywhere in the world who's having the threat of having their intimate images shared online. It works as a victim, as an individual. You visit the website and you create what is called a hash, a digital fingerprint, a unique code that uniquely identifies the image or the video that you have on your device. The unique thing about Stop NCII, which just serves adults, is that in terms of privacy preserving, the image and the video always stay on your device. You don't share that image or video as an individual. And that's clearly an important part here. When we were constructing the technology, we collect no data and no information. We didn't want people to be second guessing how much data am I giving away here. So there's no logging into the site. There's no cookies. There's no collection of data. So you create this hash, this fingerprint, and it's that gets added onto the data set and then shared with participating platforms to enable them to identify if somebody anywhere in the world tries to post that particular image on their website to help prevent it. We're using technology that's well trodden. So hashing technology is nothing new. It's been used to identify and to combat child abuse content for many years. So photo DNA is 15 years old. You're going to hear from Courtney shortly. And so well-trodden technologies that we're trying to just utilise and make it easier for platforms to engage.
And how effective has it been at preventing images appearing?
So one of the things that we do, and the last, so we have over 980,000 hashes that individuals have created over the nearly 3 years that Stop NCII has been created. When a platform identifies a match, so they identify that somebody's trying to upload that image, it just invokes their normal moderation processes, whether that's automated or human. They then get to view the image or the video. They then, if it is NCII, will then add a tag onto that hash, which then goes back into the system, which does two things. So firstly, it then provides information to all the other platforms that this is now a verified hash. And secondly, it indicates to us how many times we've seen that Stop NCII has actively worked, and currently we're working at about 22,000 instances.
And has every platform signed up though?
So today we have 12 platforms signed up, which are published on the website, and those published on the website as well are platforms and companies who we have data sharing agreements with and who have integrated Stop NCII. There's another 12 or 13 who we've got data sharing agreements with who are currently onboarding Stop NCII. It's important for us that when somebody uses Stop NCII, there's no opportunity for misunderstanding. So we know that the platforms that we've listed on the website are taking the hashes and using the hashes. We don't want there to be any opportunity for misunderstanding for somebody creating a hash. So that's why we have this kind of dual-step process.
Right. And finally to you, David. So if the hashed image or video is edited in some way, will it still be recognised by your tool?
So there's two answers to the question. For image hashing, we use what is perceptual hashing. I'll come back to that. For video hashing, so where somebody has a video that they're hashing, we use cryptographic hashing. With perceptual hashing, there is a degree of tolerance. So the perceptual hashing is photo DNA and also PDQ, so two forms of hashing technologies that we're using. Photo DNA is well trodden, like I said, so from a child abuse content perspective, so that allows some form of tolerance in terms of image manipulation. With cryptographic hashing for video, there's no tolerance. So if you change 1 pixel, it will create a different hash. One of the things we always recommend to everybody is if you have a video particularly, is to create hashes of every single different version of the same video for exactly that reason.
David, can I just come back to the question that Catherine asked quite rightly about the different platforms and search engines? You said that they are listed, and they are listed in our report. There is one notable exception from that list, and that's Google. Have you had any progress since the conversation where you had with Google had previously told our committee that due to specific policy and practical concerns about the interoperability of the database, which have been communicated to SWGfL, we understand that dialogue between Google and SWGfL remains ongoing. So I just wondered if there was any update or progress there with Google.
Yes, there is progress. We are making progress. I think it's not as perhaps as quick as we might have liked, but there is progress and forward trajectory. Perhaps at the next witness event we may have an update.
Thank you. Samantha, did you and then Rachel?
Just a little bit of additional questioning around the hashing. What you're saying is, so I understand it correctly, it is a prevention tool. So somebody has to proactively be at threat of their image going online and go on and create this hash. So I'm assuming they've already engaged with your organisation and are already feeling a sense of threat, or might have had it happen before, and there's another photo that's about to go online.
It is absolutely about prevention, yes. If the content is already online, there is likely to be quicker ways of getting that content removed. So directly reporting to the platform. We would always suggest do both. If the content's already there, because it would prevent further propagation of the same content. But certainly if it's being posted, then we would always suggest you directly reporting that content to the platform as well.
Thank you. Rachel, and then we'll move on to Christine.
It was just to come on again about the platforms that have signed up. What do you think are the barriers that are stopping those who haven't signed up signing up? And do you think we should move to a situation where Ofcom requires them to sign up?
Thank you for the question. So we are expending a lot of effort in engaging platforms. So we have 12 plus another 12 or 13, and that's great, but there should be thousands. The more platforms engage with Stop NCII, the more fear we can help the discharge from victims, a direct correlation. Why is it hard? We have made every effort through the technology that we're using, to make it as easy as we possibly can. So to reduce the engineering lift in terms of onboarding, to reduce the legal lift, so through templates and data sharing agreements that we have. NCII of adults remains non-regulatory at the moment. So, I fully expect that within companies, when we're competing or when this issue is competing with regulated issues, that's what will take precedent in terms of their priority, quite rightly. And so that's why we're trying to make it literally as easy as we possibly can. The last evidence hearing, so we were joined by Keely Blair, the CEO of OnlyFans, who I think very helpfully as well sort of talked about their onboarding process. So she talked about it being a total, I think, of 80 hours engineering time to integrate Stop NCII, which in the grand scheme of things is nothing. And it's helpful to give some confidence, I think, to platforms. We are trying to make it as easy as we can. The second question about Ofcom, yes, is the top and bottom of it. Yeah, for exactly the same reasons. If it becomes an obligation, it becomes prioritised within platforms, and so the reorientation and prioritisation of resources. Thank you.
In practical terms, Sophie, what difference would it make if Google signed up?
It would make it the searching and the locating of somebody's content so much more difficult, because we know that Google is over 90% of the search traffic. And we have, sadly, too many clients that come to us whose content is shared directly under their full names, where they live, very identifiable information. If Google signed up, that would stop a lot of that in its tracks, and that would stop the continuous cycle of downloading and resharing it at another date.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you very much. If I could just refer the panel to my register of members' interests before I go on. But David, if I could ask you, first of all, is the Online Safety Act and Ofcom's related powers enough to require platforms with a UK presence to proactively remove NCII content?
So there are. I think I'd have a number of responses to that. So we are great advocates and supporters of the Online Safety Act. However, from this particular issue, from an NCII perspective, other than it removing the need to prove intent, which clearly helps with prosecution, and that's a positive thing, it doesn't actually do anything else in terms of classifying the content. So where we report content, the royal we, whilst we have 90+% takedown rate when we report content, which is great, but the flip side of that is we have just less than 10% of content we report is still online. If we have a non-compliant platform, platforms won't take content down, usually because they're outside of Europe, indeed. We have no other mechanism of disrupting or blocking access to that content like we do with other forms of illegal content. So the big example that we have is one where a particular perpetrator was sentenced to 32 years in December 2021. Who had over 200 victims, and we'd reported 162,000 images that he had extorted from these victims. Today, there are still 4,000 of those images online and accessible within the UK. I'm being very careful here not to try to provide too much detail around that for fear of those victims and for the thoughts of those victims. So we have made attempts to use the same mechanisms to block access to that content through ISPs, but the content is not illegal.
What difference would it make? To a certain extent, you've answered my next question, which was going to be, to what extent do UK-based platforms take the content down? You're saying it's about 90%. But is there a difference in the attitude? Are there, without naming names, platforms who are more effective than others, who you can rely on more to take the content down?
So over the years, we've reported over 1,000 different platforms, and of which we have various different responses. And I think I'm going to refer to Sophie, who has first-hand.
Yes. As David said, we report to over 1,000 different platforms. Much of this content that continues to circulate is on platforms beyond our reach, whose business model is entirely constructed around the sharing and resharing of this content. They have no interest in engaging with us because they don't have to, and sadly they're also beyond the reach of Ofcom or any other authority to take action. But the content is still there, and all it takes is a very small number of images to still be there, and they can recirculate, and you're back to square one.
If I could then ask David, what difference would it make if adult non-consensual intimate images were classed as illegal content, maybe in the way that child sexual abuse material is?
I think that's exactly what we want. We want the NCII content to be treated in the same way as other illegal content. So child abuse content, terrorist content, which then will enable a number of things, but not least internet service providers to block access from a UK perspective to this content. And even in that regard, I think thinking about the victims whose content we've made every effort to take down but is still online, there's some comfort knowing that, well, it's not viewable, or there's limitations on its view on how much it can be viewed. Because today we don't have that ability. In fact, so ISPs particularly telling us that the content is not illegal, and that they run the risk, if they do block access to it, they run the risk of censoring the internet to non-illegal content, which is got to be wrong.
So would it be accurate to say that making or classing it as illegal content could be critical?
Certainly it needs to be treated in the same way that child abuse content and terrorist content is. In terms of how that's articulated, I think there's forthcoming evidence hearings with lawyers, so particularly Professor Lorna Woods and Claire McGlynn, I think, and it's how this will be classified from a legal perspective, a regulatory perspective. I think I would always defer to them. But we need it to be treated in the same way. Mm-hmm. We need access to the same instruments and the same protection to that content, and those victims do, that children and quite rightly enjoy, from their image perspective.
Okay, thank you. And finally, perpetrators who have devices returned to them by the police. Are perpetrators who are convicted of NCII abuse required to hand over or delete the content?
No, no, they're not. We had a case quite recently. Somebody came to the helpline. She had reported the sharing of her intimate images to the police. There had been a criminal process. He was convicted. He was given a suspended sentence, and the police rang her up and said, now the case is concluded. We have to give him his devices back with all your content still on it. This was content that not only was non-consensually shared, but was voyeuristically obtained. They said, our hands are tied, and she rang us to say, this cannot possibly be right. We did some investigation, but any moment that existed to do anything about it had passed because the court process had completed. But the orders that are available to magistrates and judges to deal with this, they're not designed for this sort of content. They're not designed for devices and the content that is on the device or on additional sorts of forms of storage and iCloud storage. The mechanisms just haven't been put in place or haven't been utilised. And again, I would refer to the legal experts who will give evidence in due course, but it's not happening routinely. And too often we have multiple cases of content that is still freely available to those perpetrators.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. I think that will be shocking to most people to know that a perpetrator who has been convicted will be handed back all of their material, possibly to do the same thing again. Just wanted to ask, if adult NCII was made illegal in the same way child sexual abuse material is, would we see that happen? Would perpetrators be given access to the same material? And the second point is, how would it impact the speed that you're able to block content and take images offline?
To answer your first question, I would think it would stop dead. I feel confident that wouldn't happen if that individual that came to us was a minor. In terms of going forward, I think it would be hugely powerful, and we have partnerships. We are part of the UK Safer Internet Centre. We work closely with the Internet Watch Foundation, who are already doing this work, and I like to think I have no doubt that they would partner with us to make that a reality, because they are already doing it. And ironically, we're in a position where the mechanism is the bit we can do. It is that legal ability to take that step that we lack.
Thank you. There's many elements around NCII, and one of them is around the cultural sensitivity. So I'm going to ask Rachel to take.
Thank you. David, to what extent do you think that non-consensual images that are not necessarily sexual but maybe culturally insensitive are a concern? For example, a woman not wearing a hijab when she ordinarily does.
There's a follow-up point to that, but yeah.
I will start just because I have some data about that. So far this year, 1% of our cases have been where the content has been culturally sensitive, but also we've been tracking impacts this year, additional impacts for people, and 7.5% of the people that have told us above additional impact have reported that there is a cultural sensitivity for them, and what that tends to mean is that they are then open to further harassment and, of course, honour-based abuse. This is potentially life-threatening in some cases. And it is a question that is constantly raised on our work of Stop NCII, where we work with over 100 NGOs around the world. Definitions of intimacy vary, and it's something we do need to be much more sensitive to.
And just to follow on that from a Stop NCI perspective as well, I think one of the helpful responses that the committee had back in March or April, when letters were written to, I think, 12 or 13 different companies about Stop NCI, one of the responses, and which is clearly published in terms of the correspondence from Pinterest, disclosed or suggested that they didn't need to partner with Stop NCI because they have perfectly adequate and effective sexually explicit filters. And it's exactly this point that discloses to us that, or at least gives us the opportunity of highlighting that this is not necessarily about sexually explicit content. The impact in some cases, as Sophie said, can be just as catastrophic if there's no nudity or no explicit content involved. So it was a helpful response, because it was a realisation from our perspective is that we now know that platforms are connecting this issue with nudity, which is not necessarily the case for exactly these points.
So I think you're saying that those concerns aren't really being addressed by the major platforms. Do you think they're being addressed by legislation?
No, I would say that they're not, because to your example of a woman without a hijab, where there would be an expectation that she would be wearing one, that image would not necessarily be classed as an intimate image, certainly not under the legislation that the Revenge Porn Helpline works under. You have to work with the tools that you've got. So we might be able to look at it in terms of harassment through our sister service, Report Harmful Content. But that's more difficult, and because it requires even more context, and reporting platforms to industry platforms isn't necessarily as straightforward around that sort of content. So we need to give more information, which slows the process down.
Thank you. On that, is 1%, that's still quite a large number of people. Is it growing?
Yes, I would say that it is.
The other question I wanted to ask is around reporting. So many people that would see that would probably take the same viewpoint as Pinterest has just displayed, which is wrong, but they would think, why would I go to Revenge Porn Helpline if it is not an overly sexualised image? Are there any other stakeholders that you're working with that are are having this culturally intimate image abuse, sensitive image abuse, reported to them that aren't coming necessarily directly to you?
Yes, we work quite closely with both Karma Nirvana and the Muslim Women's Network, both of whom we have done reciprocal training and have good reporting routes and support each other, because we can do so much, but they can give that additional support and vice versa.
David, OnlyFans CEO gave evidence to the committee, said it was a lack of understanding about what intimacy is. Are you seeing an improvement with some of the other companies and platforms at all about their cultural sensitivity?
No. I think so, but that could well be. I mean, I would like to think that this process will exactly highlight this as an issue and kind of draw that out. So ultimately, I would like to be optimistic, but I have got no evidence to suggest that it's changed at all.
Do you know any of the platforms that have policies specifically on culturally intimate images at all?
The Meta platforms do.
Thank you. Move on to David.
Thank you, David and Sophie. Sophie, one for you now, looking at deepfakes. So how many cases of deepfakes do you encounter coming through the Revenge Porn Helpline? And maybe if you can sort of give us an idea over a period of time as well, so we can see the trends.
I don't know that I've got specific numbers for this year, but I can certainly follow up. I can tell you that 72% of the cases that have been reported to were of women. And my handy assistant. We've seen a 400% increase in cases between 2017 and 2024. The technology is certainly becoming much better, much more easily available, and it's much harder to identify. But I think the statistic that was particularly interesting when we were looking at the data, the behaviour around the creation of what we've been referring to as sexually synthetic content is somewhat different, and it is more in common with a behaviour that for genuine content that we call collector culture, where it's not about causing direct harm to a particular individual, it's about possessing, creating and sharing peer-to-peer this sort of content. So there's more similarity with synthetic content with that. So the breakdown of the two behaviours was that of the 72% women that reported this content to us, 44% of them reported that the perpetrator was a known male, and the 53% it was completely unknown, which I think speaks to these different drivers, where sometimes it is targeted at a particular individual, but very, very commonly it's not.
Thanks.
So they simply don't know, I suppose is my point.
And I guess what action would you like to see major platforms like Google and Microsoft take to counter the threat posed by NCII, including deepfakes? Maybe that's one for both of you.
I think they need to be able to identify it and flag it, because it is really important that people can see the difference, because somebody who has been affected by synthetic content, they can say until they're blue in the face that it's not them, and people won't necessarily believe them. I think we need that creation of the registry so that we can start to deal with this content in the same way that we do where it's genuine content. And I feel that there is in terms of that identification, we had a case fairly recently of someone that came, she was being harassed with synthetic content of her being sent to her. When she reported it to the police, they said, that's not you, that's someone that looks like you. And she said, no, that is me, that is my face. And they said, no, it's not. It doesn't meet the offence because it's not actually you. But it looked like her. She said it was her husband said it was her, but the police said, no, it's not you, which left her nowhere to go in terms of dealing with that content.
I can just add on as well. So Stop NCII as a technology, so if an image is synthetic or whether it's genuine, so Stop NCII works in exactly the same way. It doesn't distinguish between the two. So it is another mechanism that individuals, victims who've had content, as in that particular case, can and perhaps should be creating hashes to prevent the propagation. So again, it's just encouragement from platforms, from companies, to be taking Stop NCII hashes in all these particular cases. Can I also add too around these sort of notification apps? So this brings into scope app stores as well. So the sort of generative AI technologies and apps that have been built that we also encounter, I think, on a regular basis. So making policies and expectations on particularly app stores that these technologies shouldn't be there. I think back in March, we reported something like 29 different notification app services to Apple, who then removed them, thanking us for reporting them and to let them know if there were any more. Our question is, how did they get there in the first place?
Yeah. Can I just come back briefly? Thank you both for that. Sophie, you mentioned about the report to the police and the way that was dealt with. Do you think more needs to be done with police around how to handle these sorts of situations, and what would you suggest is done?
Yes, I think there is a huge job of work in terms of training the police, and all the way through that process from call handlers who take that first interaction with somebody right through to the end of the criminal justice process. Because the first response that somebody gets when they disclose to either a police officer or call handler is going to be crucial to whether they take that further. And too often we have people reporting to us that they were told just to come off that platform if they hadn't taken the pictures in the first place. You know, these victim-blaming narratives are still being perpetuated. But in fairness to the police, they don't understand, I don't think, they largely don't understand the law. I'm talking about frontline officers. They need the training to understand what the law says, how it would apply to somebody's real life situation, what the overlapping behaviours, criminal or otherwise, that might be going on around abusive behaviours or harassment or stalking, domestic violence. There needs to be that understanding and of what the impact is of somebody's online life being targeted and abused in that way, because it's all part of people's lives now. So, and the signposting to services like ours and services like Stop NCII that can stop the sharing of that content. What does evidence look like? We have no consistent approach to evidence around online offending. Sometimes we still get the police saying, can you leave that content live of this case because it needs to be live for the court case? But you could be talking months and months and months where we're being asked not to report content for takedown because the police say it needs to be done. But other forces will say, no, we've got screenshots, we've got the links, take it down. There's just no consistency, and this is not putting the victim at the heart of this process. They're almost forgotten. They are a means to give some evidence that a crime is being committed, but they're not getting justice because they're not getting their content removed. In fact, it could be being reshared all the further while they're waiting. They're not being signposted to preventative services, and they're being made to feel worse than they did when they first turned up at the police, and that can't be right.
Thank you. Catherine?
Yeah, I did just want to come in on two things. So do you think we should criminalise the creation of sexually explicit deepfakes then, and introduce legislation to end this form of digital abuse?
Yes, I think we should, and I think we need to look quite comprehensively about what that looks like. It's the taking and the making and the solicitation of that content. And again, there are lawyer experts who will be able to support you with that much more than I can. But yes, there is no purpose to this, and it's widely available.
Thank you. And if I may, Chair, the other question was really kind of taking a step back and thinking, you know, we're doing this is kind of tackling the event when it happens. But what do you both think about how we can work in schools, really, and around education, around misogyny, and, you know, this is part of the violence against women spectrum, really, isn't it? And how, you know, we've talked a lot about the end results here. How can we stop it happening in the first place, in your opinion?
I think there is a huge education piece, and yes, we always end up referring to schools, and of course that's absolutely crucial, but we need to target every generation. We need to be talking to some of the more vulnerable groups. I mean, it's difficult to reach adults, but we know that older people, this can be a form of elder abuse. We know that people with additional needs, can be more vulnerable to some of these forms of abuse. So yes, absolutely, we do need to be talking to young people in schools about misogyny and about the underlying attitudes and behaviours that are feeding into the sharing of intimate images. But I'm always keen that we try and target everyone. Students, once you've turned 18, there isn't a switch that's been flicked. We get a lot of reports of, certainly around sextortion, of university students. They've gone away from home for the first time, they have money in their pockets, and they are targeted. And we need to be pinpointing those.
So Stop NCII exists as technology for adults. So it as a platform only supports adults. Back in 2022, we gave the technology to NetMech, the National Centre for Missing Exploited Children in the States, to Take It Down. So the sister to Stop NCII, but works for children. Now, there's clearly a reason why there's a demarcation, because of all the reasons around regulation and indeed platform obligations. If they do detect CSAM, there's mandatory reporting obligations if they identify child sex abuse material. But so just to having the opportunity and the flaw that Stop NCII deals with adults, but then Take It Down, NetMech's Take It Down, actually it does exactly the same thing, but for children. And we the first question you're presented with when you create a hash is, what age were you in the image? If you're at Stop NCII and you say you're under 18, then we just merely take you and transport you to Take It Down, and vice versa as well. So it helps support. This is not just about adults. So particularly the gender split and how gender determines this issue, whether it's relationship based or whether it's extortion, and the gender balance we talked about is the same for children as well as adults.
Thank you. Christine.
Thank you very much. It's listening to everything you've said. It's a general question. Everything you've said, I wonder the extent to which the Online Safety Act is being effective. But the legal system has really to catch up with the sophistication of what it's dealing with, especially your answer, Sophie, about deepfakes made me think that we've got a lot to learn. And is that a fair assumption?
I just so the point about Online Safety Act, and there was an additional point that I did want to make as well. So. Ofcom's powers, and we know that DCIT and ministers have said that the Online Safety Act will cover this. And again, I'm going to defer to both Claire and Lorna around their interpretation of the Online Safety Act and how it doesn't determine NCII to be illegal. But Ofcom do have powers, or will have powers to provide service restriction requests and service access requests, so enable to disrupt where platforms haven't been compliant, and if that doesn't work, then to submit service access requests to help block. Two things I would say about that in response to if DCIT do make that point is Ofcom aren't supporting individuals. And each of these processes are going to take probably weeks or months. We need, like we have with child abuse content, like we have with terrorist content, we need immediate intervention and immediate response. I think, when the team are supporting victims, the thing I'm continually reminded about is that when they do want help and support, I want help and support now. I want my content removed now, not in a few hours or a few days. I want it removed now. So I would suggest all of that mechanism is wholly unfit for purpose if that's what's going to be expected.
Thank you.
One from David.
Very, very quickly, just jumping back to the sextortion figures you mentioned, 91% were male. Is there any disproportionality there as to whether it's gay males who are impacted or whether it's straight males, or have you got no data on that?
I wouldn't say, I don't think we've got enough data to say as I said, it's quite difficult to collect demographic data. The people that come to us are feeling very violated, so they tend to disclose the minimum. So I wouldn't be able to speak to that.
Do you know if they've been targeted by people purporting to be women or to be men?
It appears predominantly that they're purporting to be women.
Right, okay.
Thank you. We've touched on the international element of the work that you do. I just wondered whether you could elaborate on some of the work that NCII is taking place with the UN, US, tech sharing, all of that, because this is an international problem. We can tighten up our laws in the UK, but actually we need to solve this problem internationally. So it would be great to hear from you, David and Sophie.
Yes, so a really pertinent question as well. So I've worked in this space for well over 20 years, and I am struck by the parallels with where children's harms were in terms of NCII, where they were 15, 20 years ago. Now we have an advantage there as well, is that it provides you a blueprint or an ideas about and technologies that we can use too. It is an international issue. I will say, so the Revenge Porn Helpline was the world's first helpline that supports adults, that was set up to support adults. So there's a lot of pride in that. Today, it's still one of the very few services that are available internationally. I think it's perhaps 5 or 6. There are other NGOs around the world who do provide some support, but it's usually off the back of providing support to children. And if I give you an example, a couple of years ago, there was a foundation created in India that was set up to support children around intimate image abuse. And the first 2 months of it being live, 40% of the cases were from women, because there's no other form of support available to them. So dedicated services are very few and far between for adults. But like I say, we are lucky in the UK in that victims have access to dedicated support. We do, with Stop NCII, we do work with 104 NGOs around the world who cover this. And so we convene at quarterly meetings. We have the next one next Tuesday with these amazing NGOs around the world to try to share experience, to share regulation. And it's a very powerful way, I think, of being able to understand exactly how international this is, as well as changing regulations, I think. Stop NCII 2, it's always a big job. It's available in 22 languages. We're currently working on another 10. So to try to make it as accessible as we possibly can, but that's really hard. We do rely on our NGOs to help us with that. And these NGOs as well, I should add, when somebody arrives at Stop NCII, they inevitably are going to need more help and support. So that's what we're trying to do, is to direct them to where they can get more help and support in their own country. So, for example, in Pakistan, the Digital Rights Foundation provide help and support. And it works in the opposite way as well. So those NGOs will then use Stop NCII or direct victims in their country to Stop NCII. I'm really encouraged by some of the international, so the emergence of regulation. So European regulation. We've seen regulation in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Korea. The Digital Service Act, the Equalities Act within or directive within Europe, and then more recently as well, the UN Cybercrime Convention, specifically having Article 16 around non-consensual intimate image abuse and expecting members to have laws about NCII. And we know that's going to help, because there's big areas of the world where there just are no laws at all. Even, I know we've been critical of our law and it not providing enough coverage, enough support for victims, but we have some form of experience and law as well. So we hope to be able to then provide that experience internationally back as well, as to the gaps that may well occur and what good law might look like.
Thank you both so much on behalf of the committee, the new committee and the old, I would guess. I want to thank you both for your patience in getting this far to the report and to the inquiry, and thank you for all the work that you do and for the evidence that you've given today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Panel. Thank you. We've got Courtney Gregoire, Vice President and Chief Digital Safety Officer at Microsoft, and Gail Kent, Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy, Search News and Gemini at Google. Thank you both for coming and welcome to the committee. I wanted to just give both of you the opportunity in under 2 minutes really to explain and elaborate on what your respective platforms have been doing to combat NCII, please. I'll start with Gail.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much for letting me come here today and explain what Google is doing about both synthetic and real non-consensual intimate imagery. I think, as David said, the UK really is taking this seriously, and it's certainly really important to Google. So it's great to be able to continue the coordination. One of the things that I'm responsible for search that we try to do is balance that commitment to open access with protecting users, and that's something that we've done for the last 25 years. That has absolutely continued when we're talking about either real or synthetic non-consensual intimate imagery. And one of the things that is really important to us is to continue to have these conversations, but also to be talking to victims support charities, to victims themselves, and to other tech companies. To be really clear, Google does not create, attempt to host, distribute or profit from non-consensual intimate imagery. We absolutely understand the profound distress that victims experience when they see that images have been shared non-consensually and they know that they are available online. We take this really seriously, and the way that we tackle it is by three things. We have clear enforceable policies, and I can answer more questions on them later. We want to make sure that victims have information about what they can do, because we know that as search we're just providing a window on the world, a window on the internet. We're not actually hosting the data. We want to give them that information. And also, as you heard in the last panel, education is really important, and that's something where we also put a lot of effort. We know that, however, this is not a single entity that can do this. It really is a whole societal problem, and online harm is something that has evolved over time. If I've been here 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about synthetic imagery. We would just been talking about non-consensual intimate imagery, and so keeping up and continuing to evolve in these nuanced problems and getting the balance right is really important to us. But we know that as a company that is responsible for helping users navigate trillions of websites, this is something, and web pages, this is something that we really need to be talking about and working on, and hence our continued focus on innovative solutions, and we can talk a bit more about that later. But thank you very much for inviting me, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Gail. Courtney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee, for drawing attention to this really important issue. The new era of AI is truly upon us, being leveraged for positive forces like advancements in healthcare research. But with any technology advancement, we know that there are those who are going to utilize it to do harm. The creation of currency yielded counterfeit. The creation of the telegram resulted in wire fraud. Creation and dissemination of synthetic NCII was actually around before even the advent of generative AI. If you look at 2019, it was Sensity AI that gave us the report that 96% of deepfakes were pornographic, and 99% of those were impacting women. I'm really appreciative that the UK has been a global leader on this issue, criminalizing this dissemination of intimate imagery in 2015, documenting the very significant mental and physical impacts that this harm has on women in a research evidence dating in 2019. We look to those evidence reports as we think about our approach. Microsoft has had a long-standing commitment to address image-based sexual abuse. We take this responsibility to protect our users from illegal and harmful content, particularly children, very seriously, and to contribute to a safer online ecosystem. And we do this by advancing technology, thinking deeply about important partnerships, and advocating for changes to the law and regulation. At Microsoft, we have comprehensive policies to address non-consensual intimate imagery, whether real or synthetic. Those apply across our range of services. In addition, we have to think about how do we specifically address this on specific services. So, for example, on GitHub, we have a policy that prohibits the sharing of software tools that could create non-consensual intimate imagery. And we prohibit explicit sexual content being created through our Microsoft Generative AI services. As was mentioned in the last panel, we were very proud to partner with Stop NCII through our Bing search engine and believe we are the first search engine in the world to do so. How we approached this was first and foremost donating the technology PhotoDNA that we created 15 years ago to tackle child sexual exploitation and abuse imagery. That's been explained why hashing technology is so important to putting a victim's rights first. What we did was update PhotoDNA technology so that it could be utilized on a device, so a victim wouldn't even ever have to send that image even to an NGO they trusted. They could hash it within their device and send that hash of the content that they wanted to be stopped being disseminated or hopefully prevented from being disseminated. We've utilized NCII hashes in our search index, and that has resulted in taking down over 350,000 images of NCII in the past 6 months. Yesterday, we shared and brought together some stakeholders to talk about this very critical issue and put forth what we believe are proposals to address this from a policy and a legislative perspective. Happy to talk about that more, but as we think about a whole of society solution, you can guarantee that Microsoft will continue to advance technology to ensure we can use AI for good, such as tackling this very sincere harm and detecting it across the ecosystem, making sure we have deep partnerships with those who understand and listen to the rights of survivors first, and advocate for laws that will get us up to speed to ensure that AI works for us as humans, not against us.
Thank you both. I think that there is clearly a contrast in activity, and I want to dig down a bit further into that. Gail, I'm going to come to you first, and Courtney, I'm going to ask you about how your partnership with Stop NCII is working and how it's progressing. Gail, when I come to you, you said that Google are taking 3 steps to step up the security on this. First one is policies, the second one is victim information, and the third one is education. Can I just ask, how are you assessing the effectiveness of this? Yeah. And have you assessed that your approach to it is more effective than partnering with Stop NCII, or do you have plans in the future to partner with them?
So let me answer both the partner with the NCII question and what we do at the moment. Perhaps it's easier to answer the Stop NCII question first. We absolutely, as David said, continue to be in conversation with them. And when I explain what we do, I can also explain where the sort of like the one problem has been in the conversation that we're having. So it's not just about having policies, it's about having enforceable policies. And the first thing that we do is we enable users to report, so victims to report to us. And we spend a long time developing a system that does that takes into account the needs of a search engine. So the most important thing to remember is we are providing a window onto the internet. We are not hosting the content itself, but obviously we know, as was previously discussed, that it is not comfortable for users. It is like deeply difficult for someone to come across their images on search. So what we want to do is give them the ability to not only ask us to remove those images from search, but also to go further and to look at the terms that were used to search for those images and the URLs. And when we do that, we do 2 things. We not only look at the images themselves and remove them, but we also look at duplicates. And this is really important because we don't want. We know that it's like re-victimizing victims to have to go and report again and again and again. And what we know is that 90% of NCII images that are reported to us, and we don't differentiate between synthetic and real, have duplicates. And they have usually about 30 duplicates. So we're not talking about 1 or 2, we're talking about a number of images that were perhaps created when the one image was created. And the reason that context is really important to us is that we treat this in a very similar way to, I think, how society has got to treating sex. Consent is and we've talked a lot about consent, is really important. So when we ask people to report to us, we also want them to tell us the circumstances that or to give us some more context about how those images were shared. And we make no judgment on whether those images are nude or intimate. That also, and we've heard in the previous conversation, is really important to us. If this is something that a victim feels is intimate, then we are relying on what they are saying to tell. Relying on what they are telling us to make that call. And then once we've. What we then talking about consent is really important because what we do is enable them to say that they might have shared it once consensually and then remove that consent. They might even have commercialised that and then remove that consent. But if right now they do not want those images to be available in our search, then we will remove that. We also allow them to tell us the specific search terms that were used to find that image, so that we can then make sure that they do not come up with those images, but we also look at similar ones. So for example, you could imagine searching for nude images of Jane Doe. You don't want those images to come up if you search for explicit images of Jane Doe. We want to take all of that action. Then what we do is make sure that if we are seeing repeated sites that are sharing non-consensual intimate imaging, we are downranking them. So that's the enforceable policy stuff. I can come on to the information and the yeah.
I think it might be useful for the committee if this is sent in written evidence, because obviously you have extensive policies. But I think what I wanted to ask is, if NCII content was made illegal, are Google's current policies robust enough to actually deal with that change?
The legality, we already go further than if this content was illegal. The issue for us about Stop NCII is one around the context that is shared with us. Uploading an image to NCII, we don't know what the context is, and we also don't know whether it is non-consensual intimate imagery. As you pointed out, one of the largest search engines in the world, we really need to get that balance right between open access to information and then protecting our users. And we believe with slightly more context about why the user is sharing that, then we can make sure that we're taking the right actions. What we don't want, and we know, and Courtney has pointed to this, that you can have people that misuse systems to further abuse, and we really want to make sure that we're doing exactly what's right for the user.
Thank you. Final question before I come on to Courtney. What is it that is stopping you? And I appreciate that there is progress and there is constant communication between yourselves and Stop NCII, which is obviously welcome, but what's stopping Google officially partnering?
So it is round about that context of when an image is shared. So Stop NCII was set up to focus on social media. As you heard, Meta was the main collaborator. We think there were different requirements for search engines. We're absolutely delighted that Bing have managed to work through some of that, and that is absolutely our intent as well. But it is around the context of when an image is shared.
Thank you, Gail. Courtney, perhaps that's a good point for you to come in and explain how it is that Bing have been able to get around this, where Google perhaps hasn't just yet.
Yeah, thank you. Our approach with Stop NCII was to recognize that as a set-up hotline, we respected the content that's being reported by the individuals and treating that as a report of non-consensual. We do have the capability, as we obviously implement this, to think about what quality controls we should have in case there is content outside the bounds of, I'll call it intimate imagery. Just call it a false positive that has somehow gotten into the hash database. We, in this context, have erred on trusting this NGO to be having that conversation with victims. You ask a really important question, Chair. I do think this would be clean if this content was illegal, and this was a repository of illegal content. I think that would set the standard to hopefully raise all bars across the online ecosystem. It has in other content areas unlocked the capability to address it across platforms. Obviously, ideally, we would be moving towards a global standard in that context, clearly, but I think that does help raise that bar that we need.
Samantha, you look like you wanted to come in.
I'm just a little bit confused about the reason to not do the partnership, because everything you're describing is after the fact, so the information's already out there, and some of the clarity, and forgive me if I have misunderstood, was the hash is about if there's a threat of a photo and you put a hash against that particular image, and with you saying it is the context, that feels very much like Google are deciding to be the judge and jury as to whether a victim, and I use that word deliberately, story matches up, but you're then saying that context that you look at is broader.
So just to be really clear, we do not decide who are victims and who aren't victims, and that's why it's important to us to also be really clear that it's intimate imagery and not nudity. What we want to do is make sure that users are in control of what happens. if we have the context, then it enables us to understand what exactly the search terms were. So maybe it's less the context in which it was shared. So we're not asking for, was this an image that was taken in these circumstances? We want to know the search terms. So it's the search context. I should have been clearer on that. The search terms that are used to find that, the URLs where it was found, and then the images themselves. And that enables us to then make sure that we can deal with duplicates, because I think as David explained, hash technology is really like miraculous. It has a huge impact on tackling child sexual abuse, but it can be manipulated. And what we also know is that victims, there's going to be more than one image. So we want to look at duplicates as well. So having that additional information helps us do that. It also helps us downrank sites that are regularly sharing this information, because it's not just the one URL that we want to remove. If there is a site that is regularly sharing non-consensual intimate imagery, we want to make sure that is coming nowhere near the top of search results.
Thank you. Just Courtney, just so we can dig down how your partnership works with Stop NCII. If Bing produces a search result that matches a hash you've received, are you able to feed that URL back to Stop NCII so they can make efforts to have that material removed as well? Is that information sharing, how does it work?
We are still on that step of what is the right information sharing mechanism back to Stop NCII to help them understand where this content might be in a broader context.
Thank you. Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you both of you for coming along today. The speed with which NCII is taken down is really critical to reducing its spread and also its impact. Why then do you both review content reported as NCII before taking it down or delisting it from searches?
One of the challenges as we have approached digital safety for over 20 years is misuse of reporting mechanisms. And so where I think the healthiest use of technology as we think about safety all up is how we get to a place where we reduce false positives. Now, there are additional complications in this content area, obviously, because we are talking about a wide range of intimate imagery, and as noted, consent is really important. But in this context, we do want to take this step of understanding, does this meet the boundaries of the policy to ensure we are addressing this? And in fact, that's a core element of regulation in this space. How are we going to prove that we are accurately enforcing our policies and accurately and transparently reporting that we're actioning that content? So even in the hash context, we know there's a space to ensure product quality. Your point, however, very well taken, is speed is critical here. Speed and addressing the duplicates and addressing where else this goes across the online ecosystem. So it is a place where we humbly have to continue to get better, and where honestly, AI can help us get better.
Can I just ask, how long on average does your review process take?
It actually varies by content harm type, if that makes sense, because we prioritize, as you've articulated, both child sexual exploitation and abuse imagery and non-consensual intimate imagery to address rapidly. The challenge becomes, and understandably, one of the places where we want to continue to get better, users sometimes don't report it under the right category, and so it may be NCII that they've reported elsewhere. So it varies, but those are a priority.
On average, how long would it take?
Our SLA, we endeavor to be in a place of hours.
I think I'd give exactly the same answer. Yeah,
as well, Gail.
I think I'd give exactly the same answer. Like, there is a, unfortunately, so yes, our aim is to take it down as quickly as possible. We understand the harm that this causes, and I think as David really clearly said, and as from previous witnesses as well, and I think we can all understand what it's like to know that images is out there. So really, we want to take this down as quickly as possible, but we also want to make the right decision.
So you leave it there to review it rather than taking it down to review it and then putting it back. Is that correct?
It does vary by our service. We can suspend access to content while reviewing, depending. In the search context, that is much harder to do, given that is not our content, right? So there is no And so it does vary by our service, if that makes sense, the ability to suspend content from being accessed by other eyes while a review process is happening. Obviously happens in our gaming environment or LinkedIn environment. In a search index, that step is not possible.
And I think that this is where getting it right is so important to us, because we're committed to open access. We want people to be able to go to Google and find the information that they need. What we don't want is for information to be missing because of the sort of false positives that Courtney has talked about, where we've taken something down without checking that it is indeed non-consensual intimate imagery.
Thank you. One last one, Rachel.
Yeah. I was going to push you on that point, but I will move on. What action is taken upon a user reporting a non-consensual, culturally insensitive image of themselves, such as a woman pictured without a headscarf or hijab?
We leave it for the user to define what is an intimate image. We do not make any decision on that, so we treat it in the same way as we would any request of this type.
We also let the user tell us what is intimate imagery. Our approach here does often, in this context, start looking at other harm types, whether that means harassment or others, is usually the space that comes in. But I just want to be honest. I think this is a space that we need to learn how to get better at. Right now, if an individual reports that content, we would action it as likely intimate imagery or access of private information. But the question is, how do they know where to go? How do we make them understand where to report this? I think is the space that we're seeing a delta in the ecosystem.
And if I can maybe sort of add one thing, this is where Google, when we're thinking about harms, really takes its global responsibility seriously. When we're looking at people that are responsible for reviewing this type of information, we make sure that we are drawing from a wide range of languages, cultures, nationalities, so there is that experience and knowledge.
Would it be fair to say your primary objective is to make sure that the data that people are searching for is paramount, as opposed to there being harm with some of the images?
No, I would say Google's goal is or our mission is to organise the world's information and make it accessible and useful. And in that useful, we really are trying to balance both access to information that people are looking for with protecting users and complying with laws. I don't think it's an either or.
You've got that balance right?
I think it continues to be something that we need to think seriously about as harms develop and as how we use the internet, including with AI changes.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. I want to follow on pick up on where Rachel left off, really, about this balance. Both of you talked about the false positives and the fear around those false positives. So there must be quite a large number of false positives generated, surely. Have you got the statistics and figures for that for either one of you?
I don't. I'm sorry.
If you don't have them to hand now, it would be great if you could write into the committee, because obviously, if there is such an imbalance, I mean, I'd be interested to see what the percentage of false positives are, because if you are preventing yourselves from deleting or delisting an image or video because you're worried it might be a false positive, surely there must be quite a high percentage of false positives.
Can I perhaps give you sort of also because examples? We know that people, as Courtney said, misuse these systems. They misuse these systems globally as well, and you can imagine the impact on us taking action on an image that was maybe related to current events, and doing that automatically rather than making sure that it is something that we should be enabling people to see. The impact of not getting this right is really significant.
Chair, if I may, we'd be happy to follow up on this, but the way I acknowledge, one of the real risks is in the report a concern flow for our users. Honestly, on average, we see 50 to 60% of that content being unactionable. Now, the range of what's coming through there, let's be honest, how we can get better at this. Sometimes a nefarious actor is using a bot to report the same piece of content about a real-world event that they would like suppressed off the internet. We need to get better at detecting when it's a bot submitting a report abuse that into a space And as you might imagine, these actors will, of course, use a prioritized harm as they're doing our workflow because they know we're going to prioritize looking at child exploitation content or gender-based online violence. So honestly, where tech has to continue to evolve and understand how those are abusing even the systems we have designed, that is, when I say false positive, I want to acknowledge it's this whole system. Yeah. How do you ensure that the reports that are coming in are actually from users and get the noise out? How do you then actually ensure we help users understand how to report us actionable content? And it's where we've leaned into partnerships, where there's an opportunity for a single moment to that report, and how do we address? And so then our quality control on that looks a little bit different than when I say a bot is attacking our report abuse scenario. But I give that context.
Thank you. I've got some follow-up questions from Kerith and then David and then from Catherine.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, okay. Chair. I just wanted to know if you might have the information to be able to share with the committee in terms of how many false positives you are receiving and how grave a threat it really is.
And it's a difficult term, if that makes some sense, because sometimes we say false positives as if the technology to detect has caught something it shouldn't. In this case, we know we can get better at everything. How do we leverage the right report abuse scenario so a person knows that they're telling us what they need to tell us as minimal as so we can action? How do we make sure we get other people out of that system? How do we not put artificial barriers to the reporting system? But so it's a hard thing to unpack, but someplace that we know we continue have to invest.
And I wanted to ask, on the culturally sensitive image usage, do you both have policies and training in place on that?
For Google employees, yes. We really are about putting the users first, yeah.
It is an intimate imagery policy. I suspect we can get better at training.
David?
Thank you. I just wanted to come back on something Rachel brought up around the review process and how long it takes. This is really important because the longer that image stays online, the longer that person's suffering harm, and potentially the further that person's suffering harm.
Yeah.
Courtney, your answer was usually we endeavour within a couple of hours, and your answer, Gail, was as soon as possible. That's not really an answer.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to know what your actual SLA is, and if you can't provide that now, that's fine. Maybe again you could write into the committee to let us know. But what is the actual SLA, and how often do you meet that SLA? Because with all respect, Gail, as soon as possible could be a week, and in a week a lot of harm could be done to that individual who's
I'd like to, but it's definitely quicker than a week, but we can come back to you with precise data. What we do just is, and I mentioned briefly, like the information part, when we reply to the user that has reported to us, we also provide them with additional resources. Because we know that just having your image taken off search results isn't enough. That image is likely still hosted somewhere. So what are the other things that you need to do, including reporting to Stop NCII, that means that information is no longer going to be available. And that's really important to us.
Thank you. Catherine, quick one. No, you're okay. Excellent. Natalie, we'll move on to you.
Thank you both. Earlier on this year, the committee heard from NCII survivor and campaigner Georgia Harrison. She described the positive difference it would make for victims if platforms had a phone line that they could call to report this. Is this something you have? And if not, is it something you could have?
Yeah. I mean, this comes on to the information that we have. We, as I said, like when we reply to a user, we point them to helplines that they can speak to, so that they can speak to someone who's an expert in dealing with this.
So this was specifically about, reporting it.
Yeah.
Is it so they can? There's helplines available to talk through it, but is there anything to report?
We do not have a helpline. We have an online form. We spend a lot of time making that as simple as possible, and then staying in communication with, like, online, but with the user. But we don't have somebody that you can speak to.
We too have a similar approach, and I watch that testimony with interest, because I thought to myself, we are trying to make sure we scale and take the minimal amount of information we need from a user to action swiftly. But as indicated, we really want these individuals to have the right support system that they need. What Stop NCII here does in the UK, which we hope our search engine does through our authoritative principles, you asked why do we sort the content, is if someone says non-consensual intimate imagery, we hope that they are understanding the nature of this problem through useful news stories, and that they are directed to people who can actually help them through all of the elements, both take down the content, how do you do that side, but what are the legal supports, what are the other victim supports that should happen. When we don't have that, and I say that because our customer support agents would not be trained, as I think people should be experts in this space to do that, we do want to ensure that we are getting the reporting content for what we can address on our platform and directing them to the right resources for the full range of supports they need.
Thank you. Does anyone have any follow-up questions on that? No? Okay, I'm going to move on to the legal status of NCII content. For both, you would have heard some of the similar questions in the previous panel. Is the Online Safety Act and Ofcom's related powers enough to require platforms like yourselves with a UK presence to proactively remove NCII content? How are you prepared for greater powers from both?
Yeah, so obviously we followed very closely how NCII is being treated under UK law. As I said, we believe at the moment we already go further than if this was illegal, but I think what you've heard from other witnesses, and I think as Microsoft said in their statement, that clarity is always helpful.
Yeah, can I just push back a little bit? Because you've said this a couple of times now, that you go further than if the content was illegal. If that's the case, surely there would be no availability of NCII for adult content, and it would be the same as child abuse, sexual material. So I just wanted to know what level you're holding yourself to there, because I
think that that's such an important question. It comes down to consent. So I spent a lot of my life dealing with child sexual abuse material. We are good at identifying. It's not easy, but we are good at identifying child sexual abuse material. And as David said, we've also got much better society about understanding the spectrum of material that exists. And because it is somebody under the age of consent, it is easier for us to define what that looks like. Once you get to adult intimate imagery, there are legitimate times when intimate imagery is produced by adults who are consenting, who may also wish to share that material and do that with consent. Understanding that this is without consent is the difficult part.
Do you not see some parallel about where we were maybe 20 to 30 years about talking about rape and consent, for example, that we have hopefully got to a position now where we believe a victim. And that is where I would hope most organisations, most public services would strive to be. Whereas at the moment it seems very much that your search engine is, we need to find out the context first before we believe the victim.
Yeah, so first of all, as I said to Catherine, we make no judgment. The context is not, it is definitely not, are you a victim, aren't you a victim? The context is what search terms turned up this intimate imagery. That is the context. The context is not trying to understand when something was shared or when it wasn't. But what we do know is that there are consensual sexual images and intimate images online that users would not want us to be taking down. So we need somebody to tell us whether that is the victim, whether that is government, whether that is law enforcement, whether that is somebody acting on behalf of the victim, that this is non-consensual imagery. That's not the context we're asking for.
The context you're asking is whether this is consensual or not.
No. So first of all, in reporting it, we believe that if somebody has ticked a box saying this is non-consensual, we are not making a judgment on that. We are absolutely believing them. That is not what the false positive is about. The false positive is about somebody sharing an image of a portcullis rather than sharing something that would be the contents of non-consensual imagery, of non-consensual intimate imagery. That's not the context.
Why don't you take it down from the point of reporting then? So
that is this is the conversation we've just had, where we absolutely do want to take it down. We just need to make sure that that is intimate imagery and not something that is the sort of false positive that Courtney was talking about.
I appreciate that this is a conversation that we've gone over, but I feel like we haven't got down to the real reason as to why it is that's a priority over something else. Courtney, could I just ask yourself about what it is in terms of how you're treating NCII right now, and if it was to be made illegal, what changes that would make to your processes?
Sure, I think I'm going to be clear on this one. I think making this content illegal would be better for victims, and that's who we should be putting first. It would create and unlock the capability of hopefully an Ofcom or a similar model, creating a registry that there was a single place for a victim to report that content, and it is illegal across the ecosystem, and that would unlock faster action. From my perspective, it is about what's the best legal regime to support the victims and the survivors in this, and this legal clarity would help with that.
Okay. Thank you. Catherine, did you have something
to
say?
I'm really struggling here, actually, to follow up from the chair. Surely we should just use the precautionary principle, and if there is a danger, then why not take the things down immediately? And then I'm also struggling with the comprehension thing, which is if you were signed up to a partnership with the organisations we heard from before, then, and though the imagery that had been reported to them was hashed, then presumably all those places on the internet where they're appearing in Google searches, everything would be hashed. If you're in a partnership, is that what would happen? So why not just get into the partnership and get rid of these images ASAP online?
We absolutely, so first of all, we do not host the images. So what we would be doing, whether with any of our hash databases, and we already are a member of numerous organisations that share hashes, is removing them from search results. We don't remove them from where they're hosted. We only remove them from being seen in search results, which is why it's also important to provide that extra information to users so they can go to and NCII can go to the actual hosters and have it removed. So we are only showing like that window on the world. We are absolutely committed to making sure that users that they have this safe experience. I'm going to try again to explain what I mean by what we're looking for and how we help users. So when help victims, when a victim reports something to us, we ask them to confirm that either they or the person they're representing is in the image, that it is an intimate image, and that they are not sharing this anywhere else for commercial purposes. We then, or they're not sharing on this website for commercial purposes. We then ask them what search terms this resulted in the image being shared, and the URLs that came up. What we then do, and I just want to emphasise, we do this as quickly as possible. We are not spending a long time making a judgment as to whether this is like a picture of a dog instead of a picture of what they say it is. As quickly as possible, what we look to do are two things. We remove the image from search terms. We remove duplicates, which, just as a reminder, that's 30. We're seeing normally 30 images for 90% of cases that are reported on this, so a lot of images. We then also remove the URL from search terms, and we look at making sure that similar search terms do not result in those images as well, if that is what the user wants. Sometimes they just want them removed from individual search terms. And I'm happy to follow up in writing, Chair, with like more detail, and also maybe the pages that have our reporting flow, so that you can see exactly what the process is that victims go through. And we spent a long time trying to make this as simple and straightforward and as human as possible.
Thank you. It'd be really useful in that information to find out the number of drop-offs in terms of what you've decided is. I know you don't like the phrase false positive, but it would be really intriguing to know what the numbers are. I'm going to hand over to Alex, who is going to ask questions around the Online Safety Act.
Thank you. So question to both of you, maybe Gail, you'd like to go first. Sharing non-consensual intimate images is a priority offence in the Online Safety Act. What difference does that make to your respective approaches in tackling this?
Yeah, well, I think I said we already, and I've covered sort of like what our approach is to policies and takedown and then information, and we also do a lot of like educational work. I think the difference that this will make, or the OSA makes in general, is in our obligation to report to Ofcom and to really clearly explain what we're doing. And I know the previous witnesses have said this as well. There is like, the UK really is leading the way when it comes to online safety, and you're seeing that in the conversations that. A lot of conversations that we are having with Ofcom and the requests that they're making to us. What we don't know is specifically when it comes to non-consensual intimate imagery, what exactly that will look like. And we're in conversations with Ofcom about that, what that reporting will look like, sorry.
I think my perspective is, as a priority offence, I do not think it would change our approach. I do believe we treat it as a priority offence under the OSA across our ecosystem. My hope would be how Ofcom would approach that, which would be to really focus attention on those who are hosting this content. Search engines have a responsibility to think about how our search engine looks, but these victims deserve to get to the place that is hosting this content. And so if we move that towards a priority offense, potentially coupled with the legality, there should be clearly a responsibility to the underlying hosts of this content. To action this in a much more meaningful way. Give the right to victims that they have to have a reporting mechanism, and that should be actioned. And to be perfectly honest, get rid of what we see as one of the most egregious practices, some of those hosting providers requiring victims to pay money to report their content to get it taken down. So my hope would be that's who would change in the ecosystem. I think we are treating it as a priority offense. But of course, Ofcom could tell us if they would take a different approach.
If I can add like one point to that, I think what we're seeing in the Ofcom conversations is not just that they are focusing on what more we should be doing, but what is industry best practice that, just as Courtney said, could be then obligated to other platforms who aren't following these rules.
So with that in mind then, do you think the content itself, rather than just the act of sharing it, should be made illegal?
I think what we've heard today is that clarification would be useful, but obviously that is a decision for Parliament.
Yeah. What impact would that kind of legislative change have on your ability to?
Okay, I can very clearly answer that question. Yeah. So at the moment, because the content isn't illegal, we downrank it, we don't remove it. So for example, which is why the sort of search term part is important. If somebody searched for something, it's still available on the internet, and if somebody searched for that information, perhaps because they themselves are the victim, it is still it is way down the ranking, but it still exists. If it is illegal, we then remove that altogether.
That's filled in a whole lot of gaps from earlier. Thank you.
Samantha?
It's interesting the we go further thing, because I've heard several times we go further than if it was illegal already. So it feels like we don't, because you've just said if we go further, if it was illegal, we would remove it rather than downrank.
So we still wouldn't be able to we would still have to have somebody report it to us for it to know that it was non-consensual.
Slightly moving on, but sort of staying in and around the same topic. I know your report, Microsoft report, was talking about some of the extra steps government needs to take, particularly when it comes to resourcing police. And I know we've probably touched on some of this, actually, some things that you think would be good from government, but just to sort of summarise from both of you, and I'll come to you first, Courtney, if that's okay. What action do you think is required from government, both legislative and otherwise, to effectively address the emerging challenges with the NCII, including deepfake stuff?
First, one clarification that's really important, understanding that previous law has focused on dissemination because that was the nature of the harm before the advent of generative AI. Let's be honest, the creation of synthetic sexualized imagery needs to be considered now as illegal because of how generative AI is being used to cause this abuse. The previous witnesses have been very clear about how that it may be different, and so meaning what the intent of that person is different. Yeah. But at the end of the day, the creation of it is causing the harm and needs to be legally addressed. I do think that legal clarity would unlock help and support, but as we have seen, really truly, the mobilization that can happen around a registry for a centralized place like Stop NCII to be resourced, that means that people need to, every user, every citizen needs to understand that exists, that that's where they should go, that that has the resources and the support to counsel. We spend a significant amount of time hearing directly from those who've been impacted by this harm, and thanks to a session 2 weeks ago here, actually, we heard frontline experience from survivors that oftentimes they approach law enforcement, and law enforcement does not understand the intersectionality between cyber harassment, stalking, image-based sexual abuse, and how quickly those two things overlap. I can see a potential to unlock that toolbox for frontline law enforcement to know how to help when someone comes in their front door. We have partnered previously in the nature of cybercrime to do just that. How do you help train frontline law enforcement as cybercrime evolves? This space, I think there are other experts who really deeply understand how that online harassment evolves in many ways, and I think frontline law enforcement could have those skills. We've seen that as been a priority of the Biden White House. And something that they were considering supporting in the Department of Justice, and I hope our new leadership would continue that.
Can I just in there, Courtney, you've talked about multiple partnerships in solving this problem. NCII is a problem. Do Google have any partnerships? And if so, who with, if they're not partnering with Stop NCII?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we haven't signed up to Stop NCII, but I would say that we are partnering with them. The reason I say that is we have funded the Revenge Porn Helpline in the past, and there are conversations that we continue to have with them. We also speak to numerous UK bodies like Refuge to make sure that we really understand this issue. Also, as David and Sophie said, there's a huge overlap between and as you yourself have said, Chair, about how we can learn from child abuse, and that's another area where we spend a lot of time understanding exactly what we can do.
Yeah, you said that you're partnering, but it's not really a partnership if it's not official. I wanted to know which other organisations and stakeholders are you officially partnering with to combat the problem of NCII through Google?
I can come back to you with that answer.
Thank you very much, Samantha.
So, generative AI is a topic of conversation for us for so many reasons. But one example I think that probably hit everybody's radar earlier this year was deepfake pornographic images of Taylor Swift, which were created with a Microsoft tool. So I suppose a question for both of you is, to what extent is it possible for your companies to prevent your generative AI systems from producing NCII content?
Yeah, I mean, Google has I think really been leading the way on responsible AI. We put out our first responsible AI principles in 2018, where safety and privacy was our key there. For Gemini, which is the Google Generative AI tool and image creator, we don't allow sexually explicit images to be to either be asked for or created, and we have numerous checks to make sure that doesn't happen.
Samantha, we take a 6-pillar approach as we think about how the challenge of abusive AI can happen. I'll be quick about this. First and foremost, consistent with our responsible AI principles, about a decade old now, is what is that safety architecture at that point of model creation and model application. You raised an example where our safety architecture failed, and we really recognized we had tested it. We have an explicit ban and prohibition on sexually explicit content being generated through our generative AI. We did take the critical step of investigating through the spaces in the internet where those who had taken upon themselves to do everything they could to break our safety architecture, what search terms, how did they do it, how did they repeatedly attack it, so that we could learn. We know that in safety, as it has always been, it's an adversarial space, much as the cybercriminal world has been in malware for a while. We're going to have to constantly be monitoring those who are seeking to do harm and get around safety architecture systems to continue to make ours even better. But we focus on that safety architecture first. The second we do think is really important is the role of content provenance and watermarking. I think average users want to understand, is the content I'm coming across synthetic? That's why we create services that say you deserve, as a member of parliament, to put a stamp on your content that you're saying, so that you know you own that content in the ecosystem. We hope that standard continues to evolve, and give credit to Adobe for advocating for that. We think that is a space that we advocate for this. The third remains, because those are two important things, but we're going to have to continue to get better at detecting the harmful and illegal content that will be disseminated. Because while we make these commitments that we don't want that content, we know there are applications out there right now that are enabling it. So we're going to have to get better at the detection. And I've talked a lot about our detection, which is, yes, technology, but it's definitely partnerships. And then when the law can help and support that. And lastly, humbly, we can't do this without learning directly from how users are experiencing the internet, bringing that voice in constantly, bringing that voice directly to our engineers as they're building this system. What happened, what went wrong, so that they can understand it deeply. Those are our approaches, and we really believe you have to do all of them at the same time to make the flywheel work.
My last sort of set of couple of questions, really. But what actions are you taking to prevent the promotion of tools for creating deepfake type stuff? So as you've mentioned, the search engines are a set of curtains to the world. The content that comes up on a search engine, although I appreciate that if you pay for a search engine optimization, you can search optimization tools, you can pay for sponsored prominence on the search result, but how can you stop some products that shouldn't even be out there even being presented, such as sort of like applications that make people look nude?
I think like our base. So I think first of all, it's still like this is still a work in progress. It's still, as we understand harms and how they develop. These are things that we collectively need to consider thinking about. I think our biggest defence is making sure that we are providing high quality, useful information, and I think we'd all agree that these apps do not necessarily provide that.
And one of the things I think I've had brought to my attention is that actually top 3, so bear with me, but the top 3 results for deepfake porn on Microsoft Bing are deepfake porn websites. So if you put in deepfake porn, it brings up deepfake porn websites, despite their content being against Microsoft policy. Google's downranked them. Why hasn't Microsoft?
That is very much our intent to do so. I would gladly take that and make sure that we are improving the algorithm to be responding to that query with authoritative content as intended to. That authoritative content, from our perspective, would be news articles explaining the pervasiveness of this problem and challenge, or dedicating people to resources that they need. Humbly, we can do better, and that should not be the results. We also know these search queries and how people will seek this content will continue to evolve. Yeah. That was a simple one. We should get that right. But as we need to get better as the user queries for this content evolve, because what authoritative means in this context should be shining a light on the problem and the challenge as it's covered by news articles and reports of authority, such as Stop NCII.
Thank you. Before I come to our last question, I just wanted to check around the committee and see if anybody had any follow-up questions to any of these, or anything that they wanted a bit more information on. No? Okay, I want to say thank you both for coming today and for answering our questions. It is something that we want to get to a solution and to a better place together. And I hear loud and clear that you've both said that you want to work together, to learn together, and to learn from partner organisations. And in that vein, we'll be obviously sending our report with our recommendations from the cross-party committee. Would you both be prepared to respond to the relevant recommendations that we put in this report?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you both very much for your time today and for all that information. And we'll look forward to some of the written answers as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.